Hello, welcome to the puctibyte for the week of the 17th of September. I want to begin with looking at the schedule today and really to thank all of you for allowing me to get through what was a difficult week last week. I just, in retrospect, can't believe all of the things that all of you did to make that so much smoother for me. I managed to get through the funeral on Friday, and I even delivered a eulogy, and it was good, and I really thank you for making all of that possible, for Marielle and Callie taking care of the vodcast, and for Bo and Alaya and Mara taking care of Open Lab for me, and for Sarah offering to help with the exam that's coming up on this week, and Aaron and his offer to help Danny in her learning. And I just can't believe how all of you stepped up, and it's just, as I reflect on the week, the immense amount of support and help that I have gotten and always get from you as TAs, and you guys just rock my world. Like, let's just get that right off the bat. This week is going to prove to be an incredibly busy week. We're doing two very intensive lab procedures, as well as it being also the first lecture exam on the 18th. So labs 5 and 6 are both full of content, but also full of demonstration. In lab 5, you'll want to be ready to demonstrate a septic culturing technique, and in lab 6, the ever important T-streaking method. So please do take time to review how those procedures are presented in their lab manual and in the TA guidelines, so that you can do the best job possible of demonstrating those, and also encouraging your students to watch them on Virtual Edge so that they get multiple exposures to those two techniques that will be tested on the practical exam. So because lecture exam number one is on the 18th, I will be having to be a little bit in and out during that lab. And that presents a little bit of trouble because it is the lab in which we're presenting dilution problems. So what I need you guys to do is, those of you who have signed up for the lecture, if you could let me know as soon as possible whether you would like to do the entire lecture, or whether you might like for me to take over prior to explaining how to do dilution problems. I'll basically plan to explain the dilution problem section for all of you, unless you otherwise let me know that you would really like to cover the on-the-board calculation portion of that as well. Because it's a whole nother level of lecturing, right, to be able to go through and show those multiple methods for approaching dilution problems. So I will plan on doing that unless I hear from you, and of course for section 12, I have already signed up for that lecture and will be planning to deliver the whole thing. That does mean that when I'm lecturing, I'm going to ask for your help in passing exams out to any students that might come for the exam at that time. So if you are, hanging out and somebody comes in for the exam, remember that those will be in the back hallway, and we'll just have the students sit in the lab next door to take that exam. So pretty easy, not a lot involved with that, but just your help is so very appreciated, as is always true. We've got some due dates coming up that I want to outline as well. During Lab 6 on the 20th, the students will be turning in their first lab report, the Gram-Stain report. For that report, your rubric will be the assignment description, so have the students also tack that onto their assignment. If you've never graded before, please pair off with someone who has, so that you understand how you might go about using that rubric to help you to grade, and the consistency that's really important in grading. So, for example, if Aaron and Amanda decide to split that lab report, make sure that Aaron, you grade the same portion on everyone's lab report, and Amanda, you grade the same portion on everyone's lab report. And I find that it works really well to have a little notepad next to me that I write down what point deduction I used for what sort of mistake. And then that way I'm certain to take the same point deduction on every single person's lab report, so that it's very, very consistent. We know we can't always go without some subjectivity there, and that's not even desirable, but it is important to be very, very consistent in your grading. And to always explain. If you can't explain why you're deducting a point or a partial point, then don't deduct it. If you can't in some way write a note saying why and explaining it to that student, then there must not be a place for deduction. So that's an important rule of thumb to always keep in mind whenever you're grading. We also have some other due dates encroaching. We're going to have the unknown press release due on the 25th, so that'll be during Lab 7. It's also during that lab that we'll be making Winogradsky columns, so starting on the 18th, we're going to want to try to announce that they're going to want to bring mud and water for their Winogradsky columns, and I usually like to give them, you know, a full week of notice on that so that they can bring in something really nice for that lab. Also then that means that on Lab 8, we're going to have the dilutions problems due, so we want to give them a little bit of time to work on those dilution problems and have a little bit of open lab time available, but we'll want to assign those during Lab 5. So just a lot of things, just a busyness is beginning to encroach on us as we get towards the month of October. Okay, I think there were a couple of other things in terms of sort of scheduling. One was I just wanted to note about the tardy policy. I know that Aaron has announced this in his lab section, but I think it's worth us announcing, particularly Sarah in your lab section, in lab section 10, and James and Amy, if we could make an announcement of that. We've been having quite a few people walking in substantially late, more than 5 minutes late. We want to remind them that three substantial latenesses will constitute an absence. So let's go ahead and make an announcement of that in all of the lab sections. If you guys can help me to remember that, that would be absolutely lovely. I'm going to just jot down at my notes, make sure I'm getting everything as far as all of this. Yes, I think so. I think I got through all of that as far as scheduling, and I'm going to go ahead and shoot along here to talk about Labs 5 and 6 just briefly in the TA guidelines, and then we're going to end we're going to end off today by talking a little bit about pointers for delivering a lecture, since most of you have now done your first lecture. So Lab 5, again, make sure you're ready to demonstrate the aseptic pipetting, and remembering that that is a skill they'll be showing us on the practical. We want to do a good job of demonstrating it, and I also make note of, you know, announcing about the Winogradsky column in here. Lab 5 is fairly content rich, so even if you're only doing part of the lecture, remember to just read through the TA guidelines for this, because in terms of talking about the major elements, the micro and macronutrients that are required to provide to an organism in most plates, and whether or not things are able to utilize the major elements to make all of their macro molecules, and differentiating those organisms that can and can't. So this goes through some of that, and I even give you a table with the amino acids just as a reminder, and some background history on some of the categorizations of media. Very important, because remember how all of these categories come up again and again. And so if we can do a really good job of laying the groundwork of the difference between defined versus undefined, between selective versus differential, and almost overdo this in the lecture, because remember how it will come up every single biochemical test that we present later. If they already understand the difference between selective and differential, defined, undefined, it saves us a big step later on down the road. Now, in terms of Lab 6, remember remember that Lab 6 is where we made some changes. And so those of you who were at the first meeting, remember that rather than doing the oxygen deeps that we used to do, the BHI, we've changed that up, and we're now doing a alkalinophile, an acidophile that we've isolated from some places that we have pictures of. So this summer, my summer intern, Kyle, and I went and got a acid mine drainage sample, which was hilarious. I mean, we actually had to hop the fence to get to this acid mine drainage, and had our gloves on trying to get a sample. It was pretty cool. But we're using that acid mine drainage. We're not telling them that that's what it is. We're just saying this was from a mine, from mine drainage, and we're talking about an alkalinophile that John went, hopped a fence and got from an alkaline flat. So we're calling that a lake bed. We're calling the other a mine drainage, and the students are going to find out what environments they grow on. So BHI auger deeps, oxygen concentration, that's no longer done. It really never worked out very well, and despite our many attempts, we really never got there. So we'll be making some changes on this lab. It's worth going through and kind of thinking about and looking at those changes. Also, for Lab 6, we'll want to summarize Lab 5 data. And I know it seems silly to have everybody report the numbers of organisms that they counted from their dilutions, but if we have them write that on the board and maybe even come up with a creative name for their group, it really does push them to get the calculation done. And if they can get the calculation done, they're more likely to overarchingly understand dilution problems. So that's, I guess, just a couple of things on that note. And then also remember that you will be demoing the T-streak. And this has got to be one of the most important techniques in all of microbiology. So please do, again, even if you are like, and I know you all are like incredible streakers. I mean, I've never seen anything like it really, but please still read through the guidelines on that and see what it is that the students are reading and seeing in their lab manuals so that you can do a good job of being consistent with what's presented to them as instructions as far as how you demo the techniques. So I think that does a pretty good job of covering what we need to talk about on labs 5 and 6. Again, you'll probably have to go through for details, but I want to spend the last little bit of this punctibyte talking about delivering an effective lecture, because for most of you, you did your first lecture of the semester, if not your first lecture ever, this last week, and they went really well. But I thought it was a good time to remind you of a few things that may make your lecture even better. One of the things that I find that gets me jazzed about giving a lecture is to go back and do a little more research. If I can find even one little tidbit to add to the lecture that's novel, that's unique, I find that I get more excited about that lecture content. So maybe do a little bit of research prior to your lecture and add something new. This one is hard. Memorize. Basically, you don't want to have to be reading the slides for a number of reasons. And one of those is just simply that it's hard on you and your eyes when you're trying to read off of the overhead. But another reason is that if you are reading or you're turning around to read or you're doing a lot of note reading, the problem is that you can't establish eye contact with your students. And in the lack of eye contact, there is a lack of engagement because they feel like they can turn off, right? If you're having a conversation with someone, if you want them to be engaged in that conversation, the most important part of that is to maintain and establish eye contact. If you do that, you'll find that nearly 100% of your students will feel that they need to return that eye contact. They retain engagement, you retain engagement, and it's a win-win situation. Relate your lecture to something that you know, something that you've seen, something that you are interested in, and relate that also to something that your students are interested in. So learn about your students, learn about what they like. So you can say things like, you know, hey, this is just like when you go hunting and maybe you use salt to make beef jerky. This is like the osmotic pressure that you see there where, you know, the hypertonic environment leads to plasmolysis and kills the bacterial cells. So you can engage the student by talking about things that they know and like. Be present in your lecture. You know, you've all been to a lecture where you're pretty sure the professor is thinking about something else and you're thinking about something else. And it's a lose-lose situation and everybody's just there doing nothing important because you're all thinking about something else. If you maintain eye contact with your students, you can also get their vibes. So it's pretty easy to tell if they're not understanding if you have eye contact. On the other hand, if you don't have eye contact, it's pretty hard to tell whether or not the students are understanding what you're saying. So that's a really important thing. We all have nervous behaviors. I certainly do, and there are sometimes things that are hard for me to get over. And I know that a lot of you do too, even some of you who have become incredible lecturers, which, by the way, that's another suggestion that I have, is to attend your fellow TAs' lectures. Listen to how they're lecturing and learn from them. Some of you who are returning TAs have gotten to be such outstanding lecturers. Nonetheless, we still have behaviors that we try to get rid of, right? Marielle has become one of the best teachers that I've ever seen, but she still has a nervous laugh. And so getting through that for her sometimes is hard. And I was noticing, Marielle, you thought that your last lecture wasn't your best, but one of the things that I noticed is that you have gotten rid of that sort of, you know, what is it? Auditory pause. It's really an auditory pause. So I do that too. I do a little bit of umming and ahhing, but it's something that we work on all the time. Some people, you know, tend to do it more with body language. So maybe you hold on to the side of a table, you rock back and forth, and these can be sort of behaviors that we have even if we don't have them with an auditory pause. Slow down. I've rarely seen somebody go too too slowly. It happens occasionally, and I will tell you, I promise, if you are going too slowly. But for the most part, you can't go too slowly. Definitely study not only the lecture content, but its flow. I spend a lot of time with my lecture studying how we go from one slide to the next and thinking about and memorizing the transition from one slide to the next, because sometimes that can be an uncomfortable pause, and then you've all seen your professors do this thing of, wait, where did this next slide take me? And if you can study those ahead of time and study the flow, then those awkward pauses are often taken care of. And then lastly, interlace your personality. And I've definitely seen this done well. A lot of you do this really well. Marielle does this really well. Callie, you do this really well. I was noticing how well Elia does this in terms of bringing in his humor. Erin, you bring in your humor, and it is great. I love it, because not all of you have the same personalities and the same humor. And so if you can bring in your own techniques, not everyone will lecture like me. Some of you are more similar to me in delivery style, but a lot of you differ a lot, and it's okay. If you bring in your personality, your students will inevitably like it more. One thing that I think is important to keep in mind is that your students in many ways have depth and knowledge that you may not even know about. And I think it's really important to treat them that way. So remember that my favorite quote, right, the one that's tacked up kind of haphazardly on my wall: treat the person sitting next to you as though she or he has accomplished amazing things. You'll never be wrong, and you will certainly never be sorry. Think that every day about your students. And if you do, you will always come off in a non-condescending way, and your students will respect you. Okay, so if you treat them with that respect, they will return the favor. On that note, have a fantastic rest of the weekend. Have a wonderful week, even though I know it's going to be really busy. And thank you all so very much. I don't know what I would do without this amazing team of scholars, really, to help me in this venture of micro.